Black woman architect, mistaken for a trespasser at her own construction site, until she pulls out the ownership papers. 6:42 a.m., and the sun had barely begun to burn off the morning haze on the east side of Austin. At the Monroe Tower construction site, the largest high-rise project in Texas this year, the day was already in motion. The rumble of drills, the beeping of forklifts, and the shuffle of boots echoed across the gravel. A black woman in a reflective vest, hard hat, and dust-covered work boots approached the main gate. In her hands, a clipboard, a document binder, and a keycard. But before she could step through, a cold, male voice sliced through the noise. "Ma'am, this area is restricted. No unauthorized personnel beyond this point." The man was Sam, the head of site security. White, mid-50s, with the tone of someone who expected to be obeyed. Without waiting for her response, he raised his hand, blocking her path. The woman, Alyssa Monroe, looked up, calm and steady. "I'm the lead architect on this project," she said. Sam gave her a smirk. "Sure you are. Let me call the real boss." Just a few feet away, a couple of workers had paused to watch. Jake, a young white engineer, let out a low whistle and muttered to a coworker, "Looks like someone's lost. Ever seen a black woman running a site like this?" The words hung in the cool morning air, like smoke from an engine. Alyssa said nothing. She simply handed over her ID badge. Sam glanced at it, frowned, and muttered, "Could be fake. We've had scammers before." Eyes began to turn toward her, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she didn't look like what they expected power to look like. No blazer, no heels, not white, not familiar. Just a black woman with sharp eyes and a spine of steel. What no one realized was that every inch of this $140 million project, every brick, every beam, every curve, had been envisioned by her. She wasn't just the architect. She was a part owner. But in that moment, under the stare of dozens of skeptical eyes, with security cameras pointed at her, and Sam dialing the police, Alyssa didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. She opened her phone, tapped an app, and began recording. Off to the side, a young Asian American intern named Tracy quietly began live-streaming the incident with a caption that spoke volumes. "Black woman architect accused of trespassing," on her own construction site. No one could have predicted that what appeared to be a routine confrontation was about to ignite a reckoning. A truth was about to erupt, and for the next 10 minutes, no one would be able to look away. Sam's voice rose slightly as he spoke into his walkie-talkie, calling for backup from the main security booth. "Possible trespasser at the south gate. Female. Refusing to leave." Alyssa said nothing. She kept her phone recording, calmly shifting the angle to capture not just Sam, but the security camera overhead, and the growing number of workers who had paused to watch. Most of them didn't say a word, but the looks were telling. Some amused, some skeptical, some just waiting to see how far this would go. Tracy, standing behind a stack of shipping pallets, kept live streaming with trembling hands. Her phone screen was filling up with comments. "Is this real? She looks legit, though. Why is he calling her a trespasser?" Alyssa finally broke the silence. "Sam, I'm giving you one opportunity to correct yourself before this becomes a formal complaint." Her voice wasn't raised, but it cut through the noise with precision. Sam scoffed. "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact," Alyssa replied evenly. "I have full access. I'm not just the architect. I'm a co-owner of the property. And every second you keep obstructing me is being documented." He crossed his arms. "I don't care who you say you are. We've had people fake badges before. Until I get confirmation from upper management, you're not going anywhere near that structure." His words were met with a collective murmur from the workers nearby. Some had lowered their tools, unsure whether to keep working or keep watching. Then a black SUV rolled up to the gate, tires crunching against gravel. Out stepped Officer Karen Doyle, a local police officer who'd been assigned to the downtown construction zones for over a decade. Sam flagged her down immediately. "This is the woman," he said. "Says she owns the place. Can you verify her ID?" Officer Doyle turned to Alyssa. "Ma'am, may I see your identification, please?" Alyssa handed over her driver's license and professional architect license without hesitation, along with a laminated copy of the project's official permit, her name printed clearly at the bottom under the title, Lead Architect of Record, Executive Stakeholder. Doyle glanced over the documents, then looked back at Sam. "She's who she says she is." Sam's mouth opened, then closed. "Still," he muttered, "management should have told us someone like her was coming." "Someone like her?" Officer Doyle asked, arching an eyebrow. "A black woman?" Sam blinked. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you said," Alyssa replied. "And it's exactly why you're going to lose your job today." The comment wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind that turns a crowd from curious to engaged. Jake, the young engineer, had backed up a few steps. His earlier joke didn't seem so funny now. Officer Doyle handed the documents back to Alyssa and stepped aside. "You're good to go, ma'am." Alyssa gave her a nod, then looked back at Sam. "If you have anything else to say, I suggest you call your supervisor. Tell them you just detained the project owner in front of 24 witnesses and an active live stream." Sam looked around. That's when he noticed Tracy. That's when he noticed the red light on multiple phones pointed in his direction. Alyssa didn't wait for him to respond. She walked past the gate, her boots striking the ground with quiet authority. With every step, the dynamic shifted. She wasn't a suspect anymore. She was the center of gravity. Tracy ended the live stream just as the comment count crossed 5,000. Her heart was still pounding. She had no idea that she had just captured the beginning of a viral story that would ripple across an entire industry. And Alyssa? She didn't look back. She had a building to finish. And soon, a company to reshape. By the time Alyssa reached the steel-framed elevator shaft at the center of the site, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Word had spread like wildfire, not just among the workers, but across social media. Tracy's live stream had already been clipped and reposted by a local Austin news aggregator. The caption read, "Black female architect wrongfully accused at her own job site. Watch what happens next." It had gained over 10,000 views in less than 30 minutes. On site, the construction foreman, Raul Sanchez, was hurrying down from the scaffolding. His face was flushed, a mix of concern and embarrassment. "Ms. Monroe," he called out, "I had no idea that incident was happening at the gate. I was never notified you were arriving this morning." Alyssa stopped, turned toward him, and measured her response carefully. "That's because I wasn't on the schedule. I came unannounced on purpose. I needed to see how things run when people aren't expecting oversight." Raul's face tightened. "That won't reflect well on the team, I'm afraid." Alyssa gave a small nod. "That depends. What I saw this morning was revealing, and it wasn't just about Sam. It was about the reactions, the silence, the assumptions." She paused. "Where's Lisa?" Raul motioned toward the west wing of the site. "In the mezzanine, reviewing HVAC install with the techs." Lisa Dorsey was the senior site engineer, one of the few people Alyssa trusted completely. Smart, principled, and direct. Alyssa made her way there, clipboard in hand, not acknowledging the stares that followed her. Lisa spotted her instantly and walked over, pulling her ear protection off. "That was you at the gate, wasn't it?" she asked quietly. Alyssa nodded. "Did you hear?" "Tracy showed me the live stream." Lisa's eyes flashed. "I'm furious, but not surprised. Sam's been a problem for a while. This just made it undeniable." Alyssa exhaled slowly. "I'm initiating a security audit today, top to bottom. Anyone who isn't clear on the chain of command, or who acts based on bias instead of policy, will be removed. I'm done asking people to respect my presence. It's time they respect my position. Lisa smiled faintly. Let me know what you need. Alyssa nodded. I need the org chart updated by end of day. I also want a list of all subcontractors currently on site, especially those providing temporary staffing. As she spoke, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Robert Langston, the managing partner of BlackRock Partners, the firm funding over 40% of Monroe Tower. Saw the video. This is unacceptable. Calling the mayor now. Alyssa's lips pressed into a firm line. This wasn't just a social media moment. It was a reputational emergency for everyone involved in the project. She opened her email and quickly dictated a memo to her assistant. Subject: Immediate action items. 1. Terminate site access for Samuel Richards. 2. Initiate third-party review of all security protocols. 3. Schedule full staff bias training within 10 business days. 4. Draft public statement clarifying project leadership roles. She hit send and took a deep breath. Lisa was watching her closely. You all right? I will be, Alyssa replied. But today's not over yet. Over at the admin trailer, Sam sat stiffly in a folding chair, flanked by 2 site managers. He had just been informed of his immediate suspension pending investigation. His hands were clenched tightly on his knees. All I did was follow procedure, he muttered. But even he knew those words rang hollow. At that very moment, Tracy received a direct message from a verified news producer at KXAN TV, asking for permission to use her footage in a breaking news segment. She blinked in disbelief. She had only meant to speak up. She never expected to become part of something bigger. As the sun climbed higher over the rising steel and glass structure, Alyssa stood at the edge of the mezzanine, overlooking the city she had helped shape. But now, the next blueprint forming in her mind wasn't a building. It was a new protocol, a new standard, a system designed not just to construct safely, but to lead equitably. The reckoning had begun. By mid-morning, the story had reached a tipping point. Local news had picked it up, but national media wasn't far behind. Tracy's live stream, now reposted by several viral Twitter accounts and Instagram pages, was climbing past 100,000 views. One video edit overlaid with dramatic music showed Alyssa calmly walking past the gate, juxtaposed against Sam's flustered expression. The caption read, "She didn't raise her voice, she raised the bar." Meanwhile, Alyssa remained focused. She had called an emergency meeting with all department leads in the project's modular conference room. It wasn't flashy, folding tables, metal chairs, whiteboards, but it was full. Every face around the table reflected a mix of curiosity, apprehension, and in some cases, guilt. Alyssa stood at the head, no notes, no slideshow, just presence. What happened this morning wasn't a misunderstanding, she began, her voice calm but unflinching. It was the result of an environment where people make assumptions based on appearances instead of facts. And if that exists here, in a place we're building from the ground up, then we've failed before the first tenant ever walks in. A quiet shuffle moved through the room. She continued, "We cannot build structures rooted in excellence and precision if the culture inside them is based on bias and silence. Today, we reset the standard." Lisa stood in the back, arms crossed, nodding in agreement. The lead electrician, a grizzled veteran named Mike Henderson, cleared his throat. "Ms. Monroe, I think a lot of us just didn't know. I mean, no one told us you were coming this morning." Alyssa gave a small nod. "That's fair. But here's what matters more. Why did it take a media firestorm for people to start asking who I was, instead of assuming who I wasn't?" No one answered. They didn't need to. The truth had already landed. Alyssa reached for a stack of printed policy updates in a folder on the table. "We're implementing new protocols today. Mandatory equity and bias training for all crew, subcontractors included. Security procedures will be reviewed by an outside firm. All leadership roles, including mine, will be posted publicly on site. No one should have to explain why they're here when they're doing their job with integrity. She placed the papers down. If you're part of this project, then you're part of the solution. And if that makes you uncomfortable, you're free to walk away. No one moved. Outside the trailer, more reporters had arrived. Cameras were being set up near the entrance of the construction site. A reporter from NBC was already broadcasting live, with the lower third reading, "Viral video sparks workplace reform at Austin Mega Project." Alyssa stepped out, blinking briefly against the sunlight. She wasn't chasing attention, but she wasn't hiding either. She had spent her career designing structures that lasted. Now, she was laying the foundation for something far more important. A culture that wouldn't crack under pressure. Not anymore. By early afternoon, the Monroe Tower site had transformed from a work zone into something closer to a media flashpoint. News vans lined the street outside the temporary fencing. Drones hovered discreetly above, capturing sweeping footage of the steel skeleton that was both a literal building and now, symbolically, a battleground for equity and visibility. Inside the site office, Alyssa was finishing a Zoom call with the city's chief development officer, who had requested assurances that the project would not be delayed due to the incident. "We're on schedule," Alyssa had said firmly, "but the culture behind the schedule is what's under renovation now." Across the street, at a coffee shop with a clear view of the site, a group of local community leaders watched the footage replaying on loop. One of them, Reverend Martin Davis, known for leading equity initiatives in Austin's housing development spaces, took a slow sip of coffee and said, "She didn't just walk through that gate. She kicked open a door for every young black girl who dreams in blueprints." Back at the site, Sam Richards, now relieved of duty, sat in his car in the parking lot, staring at his phone. He had been suspended indefinitely pending investigation, but the damage was already done. His face was now on multiple TikToks and Instagram reels labeled, "Security Boss Gets Schooled by Real Boss." The comment sections were merciless, and yet as much as the backlash stung, what ate at him more was the realization that everything Alyssa said was true. He hadn't asked for her credentials. He hadn't followed procedure. He had simply assumed. Inside the main conference trailer, a different kind of meeting was happening. Alyssa had convened a roundtable with representatives from every subcontractor on site, union reps, minority-owned firms, and city compliance officials. "We're not having this conversation behind closed doors," she said, "because this wasn't just a gate incident, this was a mirror, and we all saw something in it we didn't like." One contractor, a middle-aged Latino man named Carlos Reyes, leaned forward. "Ms. Monroe, my crew's mostly Spanish-speaking. A lot of them wouldn't even know how to report a problem if they saw one. We don't get bias training. We don't even get a handbook in Spanish." Alyssa turned to Lisa, who had already begun taking notes. "That's going to change," Alyssa said. "Starting this week, all site materials will be translated. Reporting systems will be anonymous and available in multiple languages, and every foreman will be responsible for communicating that to their teams." There was a quiet pause, not of resistance but of surprise. Carlos nodded slowly. "Then we're with you. All the way." The shift in energy was real. What began as a confrontation had now become a real-time transformation. Alyssa had tapped into something deeper than policy. She had triggered a reckoning with how power was perceived and exercised, even on the ground level of a construction site. At 3:15 p.m., her assistant, Mia, stepped in with an update. "You've got a call from BlackRock's board," she said. "They're asking for a formal statement to address investor concerns." Alyssa nodded. "Tell them I'll issue a written statement by morning, but also let them know I'm preparing a full report on systemic vulnerabilities exposed by this incident, and how we're addressing them not just for this site, but for every future Monroe design project." Mia smiled. "Already ahead of you. I've created a folder called Equity Blueprint. Want me to share it?" Alyssa allowed herself a brief smile. Perfect name. Do it. Last that evening, as the work crews finished up, and the sun cast a golden hue over the steel beams and scaffolding, Alyssa stood on the highest level currently accessible on the tower. From there, she could see the city stretching wide into the horizon. Her city, her legacy. And now, thanks to a moment that had begun in silence and confrontation, a new chapter was beginning. One grounded not just in architecture, but in accountability. She wasn't just building upward, she was building forward. By the following morning, the national conversation had taken hold. Alyssa's name trended on Twitter, LinkedIn, and even Facebook, where thousands of users, from fellow architects to first-year engineering students, shared clips of the incident alongside captions like, "Representation matters," "This is how you lead under pressure," and "Don't underestimate the woman with the blueprint." Char's cable news segments debated the implications of what happened at Monroe Tower, and workplace experts were interviewed about the deeper lessons in power dynamics, bias, and how leaders respond when confronted publicly. Despite the whirlwind of media attention, Alyssa had no intention of getting lost in it. She didn't schedule interviews. She didn't post threads. She simply kept working. Because for her, the real change wasn't in trending hashtags, but in how systems respond when no one's watching. That afternoon, she walked into a formal board meeting with BlackRock partners, held at a sleek glass-walled office in downtown Austin. Every person in the room, 8 in total, stood when she entered, not out of politeness, out of awareness. The chairman, Lawrence Hale, gestured to the seat at the head of the conference table. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "thank you for coming. I trust you know why we called this meeting." Alyssa took her seat calmly, a black leather binder in her hands. "Yes," she said. "You're concerned about risk, public relations fallout, and whether the project timeline is still secure." "Correct," Hale replied. "We'd also like to hear your take, candidly." Alyssa opened the binder and pulled out a single sheet. "Here's what I know," she began. "The incident at the gate wasn't a distraction. It was a spotlight on how even the best-funded, best-designed projects can harbor weak links if leadership doesn't hold the cultural standard." She passed the page across the table. It was a bullet-point summary. Changes made in the last 24 hours, security suspension, translated materials, new reporting mechanisms, and mandatory training schedules for all employees, down to the last delivery driver. "The media isn't the threat," she continued. "The silence that came before the media is." A younger board member, Priya Anand, leaned forward. "Do you believe this response can serve as a model for other projects in our portfolio?" "It has to," Alyssa replied without hesitation. "Otherwise, this becomes just another PR cycle instead of a protocol shift." Hale tapped his pen on the table thoughtfully. "And what do you need from us?" Alyssa didn't hesitate. "Endorsement of what we've started, expansion of these reforms to every active construction site under BlackRock's funding, and a formal review process to track equity metrics in real time, not after lawsuits or exposés." There was silence for a moment. Then Hale nodded slowly. "You'll have it." The vote was unanimous. Alyssa left the meeting with the authority she didn't need to ask for, but finally had in writing. She walked back to the Monroe Tower site, now swarming with a different kind of energy. Contractors were organizing short safety stand-downs, pausing work to introduce new protocols. HR consultants had arrived to oversee the bias training setup. Security staff had been replaced with a new, vetted team trained in de-escalation and anti-discrimination protocols. Even the foreman, Raul, had added a printed profile of Alyssa, bio, credentials, photo, to the break room wall, under the heading, "Your Project Leadership." But one moment stood out. As she passed a group of welders near the west wing, a young man stepped forward. He was tall, black, maybe early 20s, wearing a welding mask pushed back on his head. "Ms. Monroe?" he asked, his voice a little nervous. She paused. Yes? I just wanted to say, I didn't know people like you existed in this industry. I mean, I've been here 6 months, and I never thought I'd see someone at the top who looked like me. Alyssa smiled gently. Then look harder. We're here. We've always been here. Just not always recognized. He nodded, a little awestruck, and returned to his team. That single exchange meant more to her than any boardroom vote. Because legacy wasn't about buildings or portfolios. It was about who felt seen enough to imagine themselves building, leading, and changing the blueprint. And for the first time in years, Alyssa felt like maybe the foundation was finally shifting in the right direction. A week later, the energy on the Monroe Tower site had changed completely. What once felt like a collection of independent crews operating on parallel tracks now moved with a shared rhythm, like pieces of one machine, newly calibrated. Workers greeted each other with a little more eye contact. Conversations that used to end in silence now included questions, clarifications, even small jokes. But more than anything, there was a new kind of awareness, of presence, of roles, of what leadership looked like, and who could embody it. The poster of Alyssa Monroe in the break room wasn't just decor anymore. It had become a symbol. It reminded everyone, every day, of the line that had been crossed and the standard that had been set in its place. Inside the admin trailer, Tracy Nguyen sat across from Alyssa, clutching a spiral-bound notebook. She had asked for the meeting hesitantly, unsure if she was overstepping. But Alyssa had welcomed her in without hesitation. I just wanted to say thank you, Tracy began, voice trembling slightly. That day, when you walked through that gate and didn't flinch, I've never seen anything like that. And the fact that you didn't yell or threaten, you just stood there, and you still won. Alyssa leaned back in her chair, hands clasped in her lap. Sometimes the loudest thing in the room is the one that doesn't move. Tracy smiled, but looked nervous again. I've been thinking, would you ever consider mentoring someone like me? I mean, I know I'm just an intern, and I'm still learning, but I want to be where you are one day. And I don't see many people like us in those rooms. Alyssa didn't answer immediately. She studied Tracy, saw not just sincerity, but hunger. The kind of hunger that comes from constantly being underestimated and still showing up anyway. I'd be honored to, she finally said, but only if you promise me one thing. Anything, Tracy said quickly. That when the time comes, you won't just take the seat they give you. You'll redesign the table. Tracy laughed, more from surprise than humor. Deal. As their conversation ended, Alyssa's phone buzzed with a calendar alert. A live virtual panel organized by the National Association of Women in Construction. The topic was equity at the job site, and she'd been invited to speak not because she'd requested it, but because the entire industry was now looking to her as an example. The other panelists included a safety director from Boston, a union representative from Chicago, and the VP of inclusion at a global architecture firm. As the panel began, Alyssa kept her message simple and direct. This isn't just about discrimination. It's about design. If we can design a 70-story building to withstand hurricanes, we can design a workplace that doesn't collapse under unconscious bias. But it takes intention and accountability. She ended with a note that resonated deeply with the thousands watching. Power isn't just what you hold. It's what you're willing to hand to others and trust they'll carry it with purpose. Meanwhile, on social media, a new hashtag had quietly emerged. A blueprint for equity, sparked by Tracy's caption on a photo of Alyssa walking the construction floor. Hard hat tilted back, clipboard in hand. The image had been shared by industry leaders, DEI advocates, and even government officials. It became a movement, prompting companies to publish their internal equity goals and construction firms to reassess hiring practices. Alyssa didn't set out to become a public figure. She had always preferred structure to spotlight, but she knew the attention was an opportunity, a lever she could pull to raise standards across an industry that too often confused tradition with excellence. On Friday afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the steel beams of Monroe Tower cast long shadows across the gravel, Alyssa walked the site one last time before heading into the weekend. She passed by teams she now knew by name, nodded at the new head of security who returned her gaze with quiet respect, and paused near the south gate, the place where everything had begun. The security camera above had been upgraded. The guard station now had a bilingual welcome sign, and behind it, in place of the old paper checklist, a digital screen displayed current leadership on site, including a rotating highlight of minority and female team leads. Alyssa stood still for a moment, breathing in the warm Texas air. Change didn't always come from the top. Sometimes it started at the gate, and when it did, you had a choice. You could walk through it quietly, or you could walk through it so deliberately that the whole system was forced to realign. That was the choice she had made, and she knew it wouldn't be the last time she had to make it, because the blueprint had already been drawn. Now it was time to keep building. 2 months later, the Monroe Tower was nearing its final structural phase. What had begun as a glass and steel monument to urban growth had evolved into something far greater, a case study in what happens when leadership doesn't just occupy a position, but uses it to reshape the space it stands in. Alyssa Monroe remained steady at the helm, refusing to be swept away by the fleeting waves of viral fame or surface-level praise. She had no interest in being a trending figure. Her goal, as always, was long-term impact. Her inbox, however, told a different story. Dozens of invitations poured in daily, from think tanks, universities, city planners, even the Department of Labor, asking her to speak, to advise, to consult on initiatives meant to reform workplace equity and bias reporting systems. She turned most of them down, not out of pride, but out of focus. Her time, she believed, was best spent ensuring that the policies implemented after the incident at Monroe Tower weren't temporary reactions, but lasting structures. Inside her office, Alyssa had set up a small whiteboard labeled Ripple Effects. On it, she tracked not accolades, but measurable results. One column listed the number of construction firms that had requested her site protocols. Another listed the number of new hires brought on through inclusive recruitment strategies initiated after her reforms. A third column tracked internal complaints, now reported and investigated through the anonymous digital system she had insisted on installing. Not surprisingly, the complaints had increased, but so had resolution rates and accountability. For Alyssa, that wasn't a failure. That was progress. Late one afternoon, while reviewing electrical schematics, she received a call from someone she hadn't spoken to since the incident. Sam Richards. He had reached out not through PR channels or lawyers, but personally, with a simple message, "May I speak with you directly?" Against the advice of some on her team, Alyssa agreed. They met in a neutral office space arranged by HR. Sam looked thinner, a bit more subdued, the edge of arrogance worn down by public scrutiny and private reflection. "Ms. Monroe," he began, not hiding the strain in his voice. "I've spent the last 8 weeks in mandatory sensitivity training, therapy, and a hell of a lot of silence. I came today not to defend myself, but to thank you." Alyssa said nothing at first. She watched him closely, not with hostility, but with the wary eyes of someone who's had to rebuild herself more times than she can count. "I didn't know," he continued, "how deep my own assumptions ran. How often I walked into a room thinking I could tell who mattered just by looking." He paused. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The apology wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed, and that, perhaps, made it mean something. Alyssa nodded slowly. "Sam, growth matters, but so does accountability. What you do next matters more than what you say now." He agreed. I don't expect forgiveness. I just didn't want to leave the story unfinished. She didn't offer comfort. She offered truth. You were never the story, she said gently. You were just the moment that made the story visible. As Sam left, Alyssa returned to her desk, updated the ripple effects board with a new column. Transformations. Personal. It was a small space, but one name already filled the first line. That evening, as golden light flooded the unfinished lobby of Monroe Tower, Alyssa walked the perimeter of the atrium. She paused where the welcome desk would eventually stand. In her mind, she imagined the first tenant walking in, someone who might not know the history, the firestorm, or the battle waged to make this building more than glass and steel. And that was fine. They didn't need to know. The integrity of the space would speak for itself. Because when structures are built right, from the foundation to the framing to the values etched silently into their walls, they don't need a headline to endure. They just stand. 3 months later, the Monroe Tower officially opened its doors to tenants. A ribbon-cutting ceremony was held on a clear spring morning, attended by city officials, investors, industry leaders, and a wide range of curious onlookers. Cameras flashed, local reporters set up makeshift newsstands outside, and a jazz trio played softly in the background. Alyssa stood near the main entrance, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit and her signature work boots, an intentional contrast, a reminder of where this journey started. But for all the pomp and praise, her mind was focused on what the building stood for beyond architecture. The structure itself was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the Austin skyline, interiors that blended modern efficiency with warm, welcoming textures, and meeting spaces named after trailblazers in architecture and civil rights. But more important than any aesthetic detail were the systems embedded into its operation. Every contractor who worked on the building had completed the equity training. Every tenant received onboarding materials outlining Monroe Tower's inclusion policies. The building wasn't just state-of-the-art in design, it was future-proofed in its ethics. As she stood watching the flow of people entering through the polished glass doors, Alyssa was approached by Mayor Lena Graves. The mayor extended her hand warmly. "Ms. Monroe," she said with a proud smile, "what you've done here, it's more than a building. It's a message." Alyssa accepted the handshake and nodded. That was always the goal. "You know," the mayor continued, "we've been reviewing policy at the city level. Your incident prompted our office to take a hard look at how our own departments handle bias reporting and contractor accountability. We've initiated changes based on your team's protocols." That caught Alyssa by surprise, not because she doubted the power of what had happened, but because so few institutions ever admitted influence, let alone took action. "That means a lot," she said sincerely. "I hope the changes stick." "They will," the mayor assured her, "because now we have an example that proves it can be done." Just then, Tracy walked up, now a full-time project coordinator under Alyssa's mentorship. She handed over a clipboard, then looked at the mayor. "Sorry to interrupt," she said with a grin. "We're ready to begin the walkthrough for media." "You're in good hands," Alyssa told the mayor, gesturing to Tracy. "She's the next generation of what this industry needs." After the mayor left to rejoin the ceremony, Alyssa lingered at the edge of the lobby, allowing herself a rare moment of stillness. She ran her hand along the edge of the welcome desk, a desk that now displayed, in etched silver, a simple quote beneath the building's name: "We build what we believe in." The crowd buzzed behind her. The cameras rolled. The next interviews were being cued. But Alyssa wasn't thinking about the spotlight. She was thinking about the young welder who had approached her that day, about Sam Richards and his apology, about Tracy, now flourishing in her own lane, and about the unseen hands, past and present, who had tried to reshape an industry that so often resisted change. She walked toward the elevator not with pride, but with quiet determination. The kind that doesn't need recognition to matter. The kind that builds for generations. Later that evening, long after the ribbon had been cut and the guests had left, Alyssa returned to Monroe Tower alone. The lobby lights glowed softly, casting warm reflections across the marble floor. The building, finally silent, felt different without the crowd. More personal, more honest. She stepped inside the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor, her reflection flickering in the polished chrome walls. As the elevator ascended, she thought not about the ceremony, or the accolades, or the headlines, but about what it had taken to get here. The disbelief, the resistance, the quiet judgment in people's eyes that she had learned to recognize long before anyone dared speak it aloud. The doors opened to the executive suite, now empty and spotless, awaiting its first tenant. Floor-to-ceiling glass wrapped the entire level, giving her a panoramic view of the Austin skyline under twilight. The city shimmered, alive and moving, unaware that one of its newest buildings had already begun to shift the way people thought about power, race, and leadership. Alyssa walked to the center of the room and paused. From here, she could see the southern entrance of the building, the very gate where it all started. She stood for a moment in stillness, letting the memory replay. Not in anger, not even in pain, just truth. A truth that had become a blueprint. She pulled out her phone and opened a document she'd been working on in private, the Equity Architecture Manifesto. It was more than a guideline. It was a living framework, a set of principles designed to guide future projects across the country. Design for dignity, build for visibility, structure systems that outlast bias. She stared at the words for a moment, then hit save. Not publish. Not yet, because she knew this wasn't the end of the story. This was just the foundation, and tomorrow she'd start laying the next floor. Quietly, intentionally, as always.